Every firm, every organization must have a core, a sense of mission. Now, this is different from strategic intent, which we talked about in our last lecture. Even an organization that lacks strategic intent must have a reason for its existence. What we talked about last time is where you want to go, your vision. This time we're starting with the core of who you are and how that core sense of mission can also inspire and inform the entire process of strategic planning. Google, for example, says its mission is organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. To identify a core mission, it's not enough to point to a process or to the firm's activities as the reason for its existence. That's tautological. That's like saying we deliver a speech for the purpose of being heard, or jogging for the purpose of saying that we ran. No. Each of us must have a core mission in this life for strategic thinking to make any sense at all. Likewise, for firms or sports teams, or for armies to have a meaningful and effective strategy, for that strategy to have any purpose at all, they must have one or more core ideas or values. Better yet, a founding myth that encapsulates that core and fires the imagination. From that core mission, we can then talk about planning to achieve specific objectives. Planning as a management tool for business began in the 1920s at Harvard, and it blossomed after World War II into strategic planning. But planning has been an integral part of military operations for hundreds of years. For an example, let's go to Mexico in 1863. And at that time, most eyes were on the east coast of the United States. There, a titanic struggle between two great armies was playing out in the American Civil War at a place called Gettysburg. But here, along a dusty Mexican road between Veracruz and Palo Verde, few people in the world knew or cared what was happening, even as a legend was being born that would carry half a world away and inspire subsequent generations of warriors. Mexico was ruled by the French under an appointed emperor, Maximilian. The French were fighting Mexican nationalists under Benito Juarez. And on the morning of April 30th, a column of French Foreign Legionnaires went on patrol to guard a convoy of gold and munitions traveling to the town of Puebla. The column consisted only of 62 soldiers and 3 officers. It was commanded by Captain Jean d'Anjou. This band of soldiers was attacked suddenly at 7 a.m. by a superior force of Mexican infantry and cavalry. The legionnaires fell back under the Mexican onslaught to a little walled hacienda called Camarón. More Mexican cavalry arrived, and their ranks swelled to 2,000 men at arms. They outnumbered the French 30-1. Now, as the casualties mounted, the French retreated to a farmhouse, and they fought room by room as ammunition dwindled, and they fought with bayonets, and minute by minute, unknowingly, with their bravery, they began constructing a legend, a powerful, larger-than-life myth that would serve as the unshakable core of their organization for more than a century. When only 3 legionnaires were left standing, the Mexican soldiers swarmed over them, ready to club the 3 of them to death. But the Mexican commander, Colonel Milan, stopped the battle, and with tears streaming down his face, pleaded with the remaining French to surrender. And the 3 remaining Frenchmen agreed, if they could tend to their wounded and to their fallen commander, and to receive safe passage home. Colonel Milan's response reflects the respect that men-at-arms have for each other and the almost mystical bond of shared near-death experience for men who fight from sense of honor. Colonel Milan spoke these words: "What can I refuse to such men? No, these are not men, they're devils." This became the founding legend of the French Foreign Legion, forged in battle and seared into the consciousness of all who joined La Légion Étrangère. Once perceived as a band of brigands, ruffians, and criminals in hiding at its founding in 1831, the Legion was suddenly transformed. Its real beginning came at Camarón. Its values and missions spring from this beginning and are reflected in its motto, Honneur et Fidélité. and its code of honor, which every Legionnaire must memorize. Legionnaire, you are a volunteer serving France with honor and fidelity. Each Legionnaire is your brother in arms, whatever his nationality, his race, or his religion might be. You show him the same close solidarity that links the members of the same family, respectful of traditions, devoted to your leaders. Discipline and comradeship are your strengths. Courage and loyalty are your virtues. The mission is sacred. You carry it out until the end, and if necessary in the field, at the risk of your life. The French Foreign Legion became a sacred warrior band, bound by honor and fidelity. Now that is a founding myth, and every company, every firm, every organization ought to have a founding myth that exemplifies its code or its mission. Perhaps not one as extreme as that of a warrior band, but one that's substantial, inspiring, and captures the spirit of the organization, one that breathes life into the dream. Think of Apple Computer's founding myth of two guys in a California garage starting the computer revolution in 1975. Or Henry Ford's can-do attitude and his drive to make a car for the common man early in the 20th century. The myth should inform the company mission statement. A founding myth should inform your personal mission statement as well. It's from this statement that your strategy grows. The mission statement, it anchors your strategy and it serves as the basis for your strategic intent. The mission statement is bold and lofty and inspiring. For example, here's the declared mission of Coca-Cola: to refresh the world, to inspire moments of optimism and happiness, to create value and make a difference. But mission statements can be mundane, uninspiring, routine, forgotten. Often a company becomes lodged in its routine. Its heritage is lost, its environment sterile, devoid of emotional power. Look hard at the mission statement before you think more about strategy. If the statement is laden with jargon, if it's dull, if it talks about increasing shareholder wealth, if it talks in vague terms about market leadership, if you can't even tell what the company does by reading the statement, well, there's a tremendous problem right there. The founding myth and the mission is the wellspring from which planning emerges. It sets the direction and the tone for the objectives. One of the great strategist academics of the past 20 years is the iconoclast Henry Mintzberg at Canada's McGill University. Mintzberg has a healthy skepticism about the ways of strategic planning and the ways it can go wrong. And he has a special place in his heart for the elegant, the different, and exciting strategy. A strategy that doesn't bore. Mintzberg once said that thinking about strategy shouldn't make you reach for the snooze button. But in the world of strategy, everybody's become so serious. If that gets us better strategies, fine, but it doesn't. We get worse ones, predictable, generic, uninspiring, and dull. Strategy has to inspire. So an uninspiring strategy is really no strategy at all. The most interesting and most successful companies are not boring. They have novel, creative, inspiring, sometimes even playful strategies. By taking the whole business strategy less seriously, they end up with more serious results. And they have some fun in the bargain. Now here's an example of an inspiring mission statement. The product is coffee, and the company is Equal Exchange. Based in Massachusetts, this little company charted a unique course in marketing in 1986. They sell a variety of products, but their core business is coffee. The essence of their vision and mission is fairness to farmers, a closer connection between people and the farmers we all rely on. They didn't just want to sell coffee, they wanted to change the world with how they sold coffee, and they wanted to do it in a way, an inspiring way, with mission in hand. They took the next step and laid out a series of achievable objectives. Help farmers and their families gain more control over their economic futures. Provide high-quality foods to nourish the body and the soul. Put company control in the hands of the people who did the actual work. Establish a community of people who believe that honesty, respect, and mutual benefit are integral to worthwhile endeavor. Now, this is a brilliant exposition of mission and the establishment of objectives. All of Equal Exchange's marketing carries its message. Look at a package of Equal Exchange coffee. Everything about it speaks to the company's mission: whole being, organic, mind, body, and soul. Now this is mission focus at its best, a superb example of defining a mission that supports strategic planning. Now we can begin to locate the beginning of strategic planning in the military, the marshaling of resources, the training of soldiers, the arming of soldiers, their maneuver on the battlefield. All of this requires forethought and planning. Prior to the Napoleonic era, planning was the province of the general or the monarch, with advice from his trusted confidants. The development of military staff planning saw its beginnings in Prussia during the Napoleonic era. This was the beginning of the most famous military planning staff, the Prussian General Staff, which came into being in 1807 at the order of King Frederick Wilhelm III. This became a full-time body guiding the Prussian army, and it was established by law in 1814. This was the first general staff in history. Now, it was at this juncture in history it was recognized that preparatory staff work was just as essential to wartime operations as was battlefield leadership. The idea of formal planning made its way slowly into the business realm after World War I, and there were early efforts in the 1920s at Harvard University with what was called the Harvard Policy Model. This was a planning method that was more of a general call to action than an actual methodology. Although it amounted to little more than a general attaboy approach, it did lay important groundwork, and it charted a direction in thinking that would be joined later with military methods of planning in the post-World War II era. Ford Motor Company was in financial trouble after World War II and was in administrative chaos. The head of the company was Henry Ford II. And he knew something new and radical was needed to change the fortunes of the company. His company had been producing vehicles for the military throughout World War II, so he looked to the military. Ford thought, quite reasonably, that if the United States Army could conduct a successful invasion of Normandy, race across France and defeat Hitler's Germany, defeat Imperial Japan with all of the titanic logistical operations involved in fielding an army of 12 million men, well, surely there was something in military methods that could help Ford Motor Company overcome its management problems. Ford looked to the U.S. Army Air Force Office of Statistical Control. He hired 10 former wartime officers who became known as the Whiz Kids. They brought with them advanced planning, organization, and management control systems, and they imposed fiscal and process discipline. The man who emerged as the leader of the Whiz Kids was Robert McNamara, and he was quickly tapped as a future leader of Ford. He started as manager of planning and financial analysis, and he advanced through a series of top-level management positions, and by 1955, McNamara was the general manager of Ford Division. These managerial methods stopped the company's losses and brought order to Ford's administrative chaos over the next 15 years. And perhaps wittingly, the Whiz Kids charted the course of American strategic business thought for the next 20 years. Let's call it the rise of strategic planning. But American corporations began to base their strategic plans primarily on financial data, collating the financial figures from the previous year, preparing their spreadsheets, making forecasts based on those figures, and then setting the budget. Planning had become little more than a budgeting exercise conducted once a year, all with the illusion of precision. The planners began moving farther and farther from the mission of the company, and they focused on budget numbers as a substitute for engagement with reality. But the problems with planning at this point were really hidden. They were hidden by the dominance of American productive might. In the post-war world, America had few competitors. American industrial supremacy served to hide whatever defects planning had on into the 1960s, defects that would loom ever larger as the years passed. Now, flush with success at Ford, the whiz kids went to Washington at the beginning of the 1960s. Robert McNamara joined the presidential administration of John F. Kennedy as Secretary of Defense. He determined that strategic planning would be elevated to the highest organizational levels of government, and he created a high priesthood of planners who reported directly to him. Daniel Ellsberg, Alain Enthoven, Charles Hitch, and Adam Yarmolinsky. McNamara's model of strategic planning has been applied to many other public sector organizations over the years, and it does seem to have a kind of internal logic to it. It appears to work, though only if you exclude many crucial variables. Now, through the 1960s, the gospel of strategic planning spread and became embedded in the American corporation as a standard management tool in virtually every Fortune 500 company, and many smaller companies as well. Now, firms would create complex and meticulously wrought plans based on elaborate forecasts of company performance in the economy and in specific markets. Early strategic planning ignored more than it encompassed. It yielded distorted results. In the decade of U.S. industrial dominance, it didn't matter as much, but as the 1970s dawned and complexity imposed itself, the challenge of the Japanese and the power of the Arab oil states revealed the poverty of the current planning model. Among other things, it ignored human irrationality in decision-making and the actions of other players in the great games of politics and commerce. Even McNamara, in later years, recognized the flaws in his early form of planning, and that even the best plan, the most securely rooted in data and rational calculation, may prove useless in the face of the inevitable irrationality of human behavior and the unpredictability of the external environment. If we recognize the pitfalls in early strategic planning, perhaps we can correct and build a better model. Henry Mintzberg identifies three fallacies that have worked against planning since its inception. First, the fallacy of predetermination. We believe that we can know the future, and this leads us to the predict and prepare line of thought. But of course, we can't predict the future. And basing our plans on this single line of thought, it can be disastrous. Second is the fallacy of detachment. This refers to the tendency of planners to remove themselves from the scene of the action. This is strategic formulation detached from its implementation. Third is the fallacy of formalization. Now, this is the ossification of strategy in a binder mentality. The strategic plan is in a binder, and we put it on the shelf. And there it stays. It begins detached from reality, and as the days and weeks go on, it becomes even less of a representation of what the company actually does. The more elaborate the plans, the more elaborate their failures. So, this leads to an obvious question. If strategic planning has such an ignominious track record and seems fruitless in hindsight, then why do we speak of it except as an unfortunate historical hiccup? Just this. Beginning in the late 1970s, the best business thinkers began to they began to think about strategy and how they actually made decisions. And they began to connect this process of thinking to the real world where the strategy is played out. Marking this new thinking was the publication of a powerful article in 1978 by McKinsey & Company, the global management consulting firm. The McKinsey article was called The Evolution of Strategic Management, and it traced the evolution of effectiveness of strategic decision-making. McKinsey identified the phases of ineffective planning that had plagued American industry and left it vulnerable to new challenges. This article called for changes in the way we think and the way we conceive of planning. Let's look quickly at these phases so that we can understand how we reached our present point. The first phase was the 1950s whiz kid phase, the financial planning phase. Now, this viewed planning as almost a purely financial problem and was conducted as an annual budgeting exercise. We've seen how this is inadequate, and yet this focus lingers on in some businesses because it's easy. Now, the second phase was forecast-based planning, which recognized that deeper thinking is necessary about resource allocation and the development of key issues. The third phase was externally oriented planning. This kind of planning was even better because it looked outward to how the firm interacts with the external environment of competitors and other businesses. The final and highest phase was strategic management itself, and here we aim to weld strategic planning and management into a single process in pursuit of that lodestone, the linking of strategy conception with execution. This means diffusing the ability to think strategically throughout the entire organization, a worthy goal. But this, of course, is easier said than done. This is rarely accomplished because of natural inertia, the distribution of power, and the unity of effort that's needed. So this brings us to the state of strategic planning today. For our purposes, the strategic planning process offers incredible benefits if we pursue it correctly. And here I offer a 6-step strategic planning process. 6 steps to the crafting of competent strategy. Here we learn the steps in constructing a competent basic strategy. How to develop a strategy in building block form. Now this strategic planning process is one version of planning. It's not the only process. Every competent firm has its own version of this process. It may be 5 steps. It may be 7 steps. But these are the main steps. 2 of them we've covered in this lecture. The remainder we'll be covering in later lectures. These are the mission, the objective, the situation analysis, strategy formulation, strategy implementation, and control. First, your mission. I began this lecture with a dramatic call to action. Your mission is your core that guides you. Define your mission now. Can you do it in a few short sentences or even one sentence? You'd be surprised how many people take this for granted in both their personal and in their professional lives. Entire companies can take this for granted, never looking to their mission to guide them in the setting of objectives. Now, the second step is the setting of objectives. You choose these based on some notion of wanting to fulfill your mission. They should be clear, concise, achievable, and in some sense, they should be measurable. You want to see progress towards your mission. You can measure your progress in the effectiveness of your strategy. Number of meals served, number of satisfied clients, average test scores increasing, market share targets are met, revenues are increasing, the hill is taken from the enemy, you complete med school, you complete your first tour in the Peace Corps. Now, the third step is pivotal for most firms, and it is the most involved. This is the environmental scan. We look at the environment in which our firm functions, both the external environment and the internal environment. On a personal level, we evaluate the external factors that impinge on us with respect to our objectives. We devote several upcoming lectures to the scanning of our environment, what to look for, and how to look for it. It's common sense that we should develop knowledge about our own capabilities and resources and then evaluate them against the outside environment to see if we can actually do what we intend to do. But as we saw in our discussion of strategic planning's history, common sense isn't all that common. Now, the fourth step is the actual formulation of our strategy. We decide what we will actually do to get from where we are to where we want to be. We decide the when, where, and how much of our plan. We allocate resources, and we connect our management decisions with the folks who actually implement the plan. The fifth step is implementation of our strategy, and here is where many companies fail in their strategic efforts. The military has a dictum for its officers when directing the soldiers: supervise and refine. This means not to simply issue orders and then assume they'll be carried out as issued. Experience shows us that too many dissonant factors can disrupt even the best of plans. The variables can wreak havoc on our work. We must constantly supervise and refine during the implementation phase. And this leads us to the final step of the strategic planning process: control. Control is just what it sounds like. We develop a control mechanism to evaluate if our plan is actually working. Is our plan getting the results we want? If not, why not? We're already familiar with control mechanisms. They're all around us. In university classes, the control mechanism is regular examinations to verify that both learning and teaching strategies are working. In manufacturing, the quality control department is a method of control and evaluation, and this helps the firm discover systemic deficiencies. The Japanese concept of Kaizen, or continuous improvement, is a form of control. Now, when our control or monitoring system tells us that something is amiss in our strategy, we can then circle back to our environmental scan to discover if the relevant environmental factors have changed. As we think about our own strategic planning process, we should remember to remain rooted in our purpose, our mission, and we should remember what constitutes a good strategy. We don't want to do things just like everyone else. We don't want to be yet another Me Too offering in the marketplace, undifferentiated in any meaningful way. We are not filling out a checklist. We want to remember our definition of strategy from Michael Porter. It means doing things differently. This is one of the most incredibly useful takeaways that the world of strategy can offer us, and it comes from his powerful 1996 article in Harvard Business Review. What is strategy? What does it take to be different? Creating different products or producing old products in unique ways. It means taking resources largely available to everyone and then assembling them in a way that yields competitive advantage. It also takes time. In Michael Porter's view, the proper time frame for strategic planning may very well be a decade or more. Maybe that seems impossible. Maybe for your organization, looking 5 years ahead is all you can do. The point is that the time frame of a single budget or planning cycle is typically not enough for a strategy to be successful. Remember the plan recommended to President Kennedy for beating the Russians in space? Beating the Russians took literally a decade. Planning far in advance has other advantages as well. As Porter noted, a long-range plan fosters improvements in individual activities and the fit across activities. It allows an organization to build unique capabilities and skills tailored to its strategy. Now, as we enter into this strategic planning process, this idea of seeking competitive advantage by doing things differently should inform us every step of the way. Strategic planning has its adherents and its detractors. It takes time, and it can take too much time, especially if the plan is never executed. Used mindlessly, the process can ignore far more than it reveals, perhaps nothing more than an annual budget exercise. Like any process, strategic planning is not perfect, but if we recognize its strengths and stay cognizant of its weaknesses, we can make use of the technique for our own benefit. What we have discussed in this lecture is an overview of strategic planning, plus with specific attention to the core mission. We'll cover the other steps of strategic planning in later lectures, but for now, be aware that anyone can develop a competent and effective strategy with this basic strategic planning process, whether for business or for the accomplishment of personal goals, if there is a core sense of mission. Near the beginning of this lecture, I presented to you the example of the French Foreign Legion as an organization with a superb sense of self and mission derived from a conflict on a dusty battlefield 150 years ago. What are the Foreign Legion today? Each year, the French Foreign Legion publicly reiterates its mission and links its current legionnaires to its founding traditions. Every April 30th at its headquarters in Aubagne, near Marseille, La Légion étrangère celebrates the Feast of Cameroon in a solemn ceremony that commemorates the founding legend of the Legion. It serves as a major source of its operational effectiveness, its ability to disseminate its strategy to all levels of the organization, and a splendid example of how to link those who make the strategy with those who execute it.